Welcome to this video. I'm going to be talking about the elemental classification of the court cards and relating that to the Tetragrammaton. For those of you that had seen the previous video on the introduction to the court cards, I finished that video by saying I'm going to do 4 very short videos on how to categorize the court cards and hence be able to understand them better and where their meanings come from. So for this video we'll look at their elemental classification with regards to the Tetragrammaton, and I did say that I'd explain the Tetragrammaton briefly. So for those of you that have seen my previous videos, I've talked about that a fair bit, but essentially Tetragrammaton means tetra, the tetra part means 4, and grammaton, grammar, letters, so 4 letters, and that relates to the 4 letters of God, and that is supposed to be a name that you cannot speak out loud. So the Y comes from the Yod, then we get the Hey primal, the Vav, and the Hey final. These words can change depending on various different interpretations of the Hebrew, so you can get Yud in place of Yod, and so on, but these are more than acceptable. So we get YHVH or JHVH, so you get Yahweh or Jehovah, and these are supposed to be the unpronounceable names of God. And they're unpronounceable because essentially you cannot speak the name of God without blaspheming it. And ultimately, in a spiritual sense, what it's saying is that the mind cannot understand God. These are supposed to be the 4 aspects of God. I don't really like that classification, because if we look at Prism here, you've got the white, and you use this as a spiritual analogy, you've got the white light of God here, and as soon as you get creation you get all the various different parts and the different characters and the different elements. So there really are no parts in the white light of God, and for those of you that meditate and have meditated on white light, you won't see any parts to it. So moving on, we'll say we have the potential of God to manifest in 4 ways. And these very simply can be related to the family. So the Yod is related to the father, the Hey primal related to the mother, the Vav related to the son, and the Hey final to the daughter. So just try and think of the 4 aspects of God manifesting through the family. Now in relation to the court cards, the knights relate to the father or the Yod, the queens relate to the mother, the Hey primal, the princes relate to the Vav and the son, and the princesses relate to the daughter and the Hey final. So these court cards are related also to forces of nature, and these forces of nature are elemental. So I've introduced the forces of nature underneath the court cards and the elements here, because the element of fire is associated with Yod, water with Hey primal, so you've got the active, the passive, then you've got the sun, which is to do with air, and the Hey final to do with earth. So looking back at this prism, this is where you get the fire, water, air and earth manifesting from the oneness of God. from this Tetragrammaton here. So the knights represent the will of God, which are surging. The queens represent the love of God, which is flowing. Princes represent the reason of God, which is expanding, and the princess is the action, which is consolidating. And the final thing I'll just put in this table is the minor arcana. So you can see that they all come together, they're all associated with the Tetragrammaton here. So we've got wands in representing Yod, the cups, the He primal, swords, the Vav, and the discs, the He final. So I've introduced this second table down below here. I found the understanding the elemental attribution of the court cards quite confusing over the years, and the way I've come to understand it is to just read out what is in the top of the column here. So for the first one, we've got the knights, which are the fiery part of the suit. So that's the fiery part of the suit to which that particular knight belongs. The queens would be the watery part of the suit, princes the airy part of the suit, and the princesses the earthy part of the suit. So we'll see how that plays out. For the Knight of Wands, the suit is wands. So that's the second bit here, and the knight, it's the fiery part of wands, so it's the fire of fire. And as we see here, you've got a rather impulsive, surging figure, as was described in the first table here. Next we have the Queen of Wands. So for the queens, they're the watery part of wands, so it's the watery part of fire, so we say the water of fire, which is not the same as the fire of water, as we'll see. So queen's watery part of the suit, watery, it's the water of fire, or the watery part of fire. Next, the prince, excuse me, we have the Prince of Wands. So princes are the airy part of the suit, so that's the air of fire, the airy part of fire. And finally we have the Princess of Wands, the princesses being associated with earth, so it's the earthy part of fire. I'm going to go through the how these all play out in terms of the meanings when I come to the cards themselves. Next up we have the Knight of Cups. So we're in a different suit now. So it's the fiery part of the suit. So it's the fire of water, the fiery part of water, because we're in cups. Just as a little taster, with these different elements here, some elements get on and combine with a particular element more than others, and fire and water don't particularly get on. So with this card here, we see a rather romantic looking dashing knight, but it may be when we come to the meaning of this card that all is not what it seems. So this is where the elemental attributions of these cards come into play. One of my favourite cards next, the Queen of Cups, and she is the watery part of water. And just see how here she is, you can hardly see her, she blends in, she's that flow, that love, and yet even this, if it's ill-dignified, it can mean like stagnation, but this has a lot of positive, intuitive meaning to this card. It's lovely, so hopefully you can intuit some idea of how these elements are playing out with regards to the meanings. Next we have the Prince of Cups here, which is the airy part of water, princes being air. Again, this is all linked in to the table above, so it's the airy part of water, air of water. The last in the suit is the lovely Princess of Cups, and that's the earthy part of water. Now in the suit of swords we have the Knight of Swords, He's actually flying through the air. So we're in the nights, back in the night, so it's the fiery part of air. We can sort of glean a little bit into this picture, into the meaning, and relate that back to fire and air, because we don't see an awful lot of chaos and confusion there. He's just riding quickly along. So fire and air, we can say, are not particularly antagonistic, and I'll talk about that more in a video on elemental dignities. Here we have the Queen of Swords, and she is the watery part of air. So it's water of air, and obviously she's got a sword there representing the sword part, and she's on a cloud. Again, not a mega amount of chaos in this card, although she obviously has a keen will and determination here. So from that we can say that water and air, again, are very similar to fire and air, and that there's not a tremendous amount of antagonistic sort of qualities between the two. They don't clash. So we'll see what happens with the Prince of Swords. The Prince of Swords is heir of air, and as you can see, we have a fairly sort of chaotic looking card. Like elements, they just strengthen one another, and by that I don't necessarily mean it produces a good outcome, but just that they are of the same nature, and therefore they push each other in the same direction. And it's the same as water of water, you get a very watery card. Fire of fire, you get a very fiery card. So air of air, there'll be various qualities associated with the Prince of Swords because of this double air quality that he possesses. Lastly, in the suit of swords, we have the Princess of Swords, and she is the earthy part of air. So from this, we've got all this black clouds, and she's obviously in battle. So earth and air, in terms of their relationship, it's obviously a very antagonistic and difficult relationship that these two elements have. Again, I'll go more in detail in that in a up and coming video, but I didn't just want to just give you all of these relationships here without giving you a little bit of explanation as to the interaction between these and the meaning of the card. So we'll quickly move on to the last line here and then finish the video. Here we have the Knight of Discs, and he is the fiery part of earth. So we have the knight's the fiery part of the suit of discs. So even though he's a knight, notice he's a lot more sedate than the Knight of Wands, because he's got that earthy component that gives him an agricultural and far more sedate feel. So Queen of Discs next. Queen of Discs represents the watery part of earth, Queen of the water, and is in the suit of discs. Prince of Disc here represents the air of earth. Princes are the airy part of the suit, and we're in the suit of discs, so we get the airy part of earth. The very last one, again one of my favourites, the Princess of Discs, and that's the earthy part of earth. So she's obviously in some woodland here, and in fact she is said to be with child, and therefore because she's the last one here and she is with child, this process of the Tetragrammaton is a cyclical one, and that's why I put the arrow here, because one thing I forgot to mention was that the princesses here eventually sit on the throne of the queen and awaken the father, so you get another cycle of father and mother, and hence that's what happens here with the court cards elementally. So a lot of information here, I really appreciate that. So that's why I've divided these videos up. So the next video we'll talk about the astrological association of the court cards. The princesses are the exception, but we'll go through that in the next video.